I woke up in the hospital after a minor car accident, and my doctor told my family I had advanced dementia. He showed them brain scans and test results proving I was deteriorating rapidly. He recommended immediate nursing home placement. My wife was crying. My children were making plans to move me into a facility by the end of the week, but I felt completely fine, sharp, clear-minded. I could remember everything. I knew exactly where I was and what had happened. Something was very wrong. The doctor's name was Stephen Morrison. He'd been my primary care physician for about 8 months. I'd switched to him after my previous doctor retired. Stephen was in his early 50s, confident and professional. He ran a successful practice on the west side of Columbus with several other doctors. Everyone spoke highly of him. He had excellent reviews online. He seemed like a good choice when I needed a new physician. The accident had been minor. I was driving through an intersection when another car ran a red light and clipped my rear bumper. My car spun around and hit a lamppost. The airbags deployed. I was shaken up, but not seriously hurt. The ambulance brought me to Columbus General Hospital as a precaution. They wanted to check for injuries and keep me under observation for a few hours. I'd called my wife, Elizabeth, from the emergency room, told her I was fine, just a minor accident, a few bruises, nothing to worry about. She insisted on coming to the hospital anyway. Our son Michael lived nearby and met her there. Our daughter Sarah was driving in from Cincinnati. Everyone was concerned, but I kept telling them I was okay. The emergency room doctor examined me thoroughly. No broken bones, no internal injuries, a mild concussion but nothing serious. He said I could go home that evening after a few more hours of observation. Everything seemed routine, standard procedure after a car accident. Then Dr. Morrison showed up. He wasn't on duty at the hospital that day. He wasn't my treating physician for the accident. But somehow he'd heard I was there and came to check on me. At the time, I thought it was nice, my personal doctor taking the time to look in on me, making sure I was being properly cared for. Now I understand it was something else entirely. Dr. Morrison examined me, asked me questions, had me follow his finger with my eyes, had me squeeze his hands, had me stand and walk, all standard neurological tests. I passed everything easily. I felt fine, a bit sore from the accident, but mentally sharp. Then he asked me some other questions. What year was it? Who was the president? What was my home address? What had I eaten for breakfast? Simple questions that anyone should be able to answer. I answered every single one correctly without hesitation. But then Dr. Morrison's expression changed. He looked concerned. He asked Elizabeth to step outside with him. They were gone for about 10 minutes. When they came back, Elizabeth looked upset. Dr. Morrison looked serious and professional. He said he'd ordered some additional tests, brain scans, cognitive assessments, blood work. He wanted to rule out some concerns he had about my neurological function. I asked what concerns. I felt fine. I'd answered all his questions correctly. He said that sometimes after head trauma, underlying conditions could become apparent, that he wanted to be thorough, that it was probably nothing but better to check. The tests took most of the afternoon. Brain MRI, CT scan, cognitive assessments where I had to remember lists of words and draw shapes and solve simple puzzles. I did fine on all of them. At least I thought I did. I certainly felt like I was performing normally. Elizabeth stayed with me the whole time. Michael had to leave for a work meeting but said he'd come back that evening. Sarah was stuck in traffic but texted that she'd be there as soon as she could. Everyone was worried, but I kept reassuring them. I was fine, just a bump on the head, nothing serious. Then, that evening, Dr. Morrison came back with the results. He asked Elizabeth, Michael, and Sarah to join us in a consultation room. Small room with a table and chairs. Very clinical, very serious. The kind of room where doctors deliver bad news. Dr. Morrison sat across from us. He had a tablet with him showing various scans and test results. He looked grave. He said he was sorry to have to tell us this, but the tests had revealed something unexpected, something serious. He pulled up images on his tablet, brain scans that meant nothing to me. They looked like any other brain scan I'd ever seen. But Dr. Morrison pointed to various areas and explained that there was significant deterioration, shrinkage in key areas associated with memory and cognition, patterns consistent with advanced dementia. Elizabeth gasped. Sarah started crying. Michael looked shocked. I sat there confused because I felt completely normal. How could I have advanced dementia when I could remember everything? When I'd just had a completely lucid conversation with my family, Dr. Morrison continued. He said the accident hadn't caused this. The dementia had been developing for years, but the trauma from the accident had made it more apparent, had accelerated symptoms that had probably been subtle before. He showed us more test results, cognitive assessments where apparently I'd performed poorly, blood markers indicating neurological decline. He said I would need full-time care soon, that my condition would deteriorate rapidly now, that within months I'd likely be unable to care for myself, that we needed to start planning immediately, that the best option would be a specialized memory care facility where I could receive proper treatment. My family was devastated. Elizabeth was crying. Sarah was asking questions about treatment options and prognosis. Michael was already talking about which facilities we should look at. Everyone was making plans for my care, and I sat there thinking this was insane. I felt fine. I remembered my childhood clearly. I could recall what I'd eaten for breakfast. I knew all my grandchildren's names and birthdays. I could do math in my head. I could quote books I'd read years ago. How could I have advanced dementia? I tried to speak up, tried to tell them I felt normal. But Dr. Morrison interrupted. He said this was common, that dementia patients often didn't recognize their own decline, that denial was part of the disease process, that my insistence that I felt fine was actually a symptom proving how advanced my condition was. Elizabeth looked at me with such sadness, like she was looking at someone who was already gone. Sarah held my hand and told me everything would be okay. Michael was on his phone researching memory care facilities. Nobody was listening to me. Nobody believed me when I said I felt normal. Dr. Morrison recommended immediate action. He said I should be under supervision, that I shouldn't be alone, that I definitely shouldn't drive, that we should start the process of finding a facility right away because the good ones had waiting lists. He also recommended that Elizabeth establish a medical power of attorney immediately if we didn't already have one. That, given my condition, I wouldn't be competent to make my own medical decisions much longer, that someone needed legal authority to make decisions on my behalf. Elizabeth said we had power of attorney documents from years ago. Dr. Morrison said they should update them, make sure they were current and comprehensive. He could recommend a lawyer who specialized in elder law if they needed one. Everything was moving so fast. One minute I was being treated for a minor car accident. The next minute I was being diagnosed with advanced dementia, and my family was planning to put me in a nursing home. It felt surreal, like it was happening to someone else. They kept me in the hospital overnight for observation. Elizabeth stayed with me. She kept looking at me like she was trying to memorize my face, like I was disappearing right in front of her. It broke my heart. I tried talking to her, tried convincing her that I was fine. I told her about our first date, our wedding day, the day each of our children was born. Specific memories with vivid details, proving that my memory was intact, that my mind was clear. She smiled sadly, said she was glad I could still remember the good times, said she'd treasure these moments while I was still myself. She didn't believe me. She thought the memories I was recounting were just islands of clarity in a sea of decline, that soon even these would be gone. I couldn't sleep that night. I lay in the hospital bed thinking about what had happened, about Dr. Morrison's diagnosis, about the brain scans and test results. Something didn't add up. I felt completely normal, but according to the tests, I had severe dementia. How was that possible? I started thinking about Dr. Morrison, about how he'd shown up at the hospital, even though he wasn't on duty, about how quickly he'd ordered all those tests, about how definitive his diagnosis was after just one day of testing. It seemed rushed, almost like he'd been expecting to find something wrong. The next morning, Michael and Sarah came back to the hospital. They'd been up all night researching dementia and memory care facilities. They had a list of places to visit, questions to ask. They were being proactive and responsible children trying to handle a devastating diagnosis. Dr. Morrison came by during morning rounds. He reviewed my chart, asked me some questions. How was I feeling? Did I know where I was? What year was it? I answered everything correctly. He nodded like this was expected, said I was having a good day, but that didn't change the underlying diagnosis. He said I could go home today, but I needed full-time supervision. Elizabeth needed to watch me constantly, make sure I didn't wander off or do something dangerous, and they needed to start visiting facilities immediately because placement could take several weeks. He also gave Elizabeth contact information for a nursing home in Westerville, Serenity Pines Memory Care. He said it was one of the best facilities in the area, specialized in dementia patients, had excellent care and high staff ratios. He'd already called them and explained my situation. They were expecting us to visit soon. That seemed odd to me. Why would my doctor already be calling nursing homes on my behalf? We'd only just received this diagnosis last night. Why was he pushing so hard for immediate placement? Why wasn't he suggesting other options? Second opinions? Treatment plans that didn't involve locking me away in a facility? But my family didn't question it. They were in shock, trying to process devastating news, trusting the doctor who seemed so knowledgeable and concerned. They thanked him for his help and his recommendations. They didn't see what I was seeing, that something about this whole situation felt orchestrated. Elizabeth drove me home from the hospital. She'd hidden my car keys, taken away my wallet. She was treating me like a child who needed to be supervised. It was humiliating, but I understood. She believed I had dementia. She was trying to keep me safe. Michael and Sarah followed us home. They'd taken time off work to help with this crisis. They'd already scheduled visits to 3 different memory care facilities for the next 2 days. They had applications and financial information packets. They were moving forward with Dr. Morrison's recommendations without question. I tried once more to convince them I was fine. I sat my family down in our living room and talked to them, answered questions, recited poetry I'd memorized in college, explained complex topics to prove my mind was working, did everything I could to demonstrate I was cognitively intact. They humored me, smiled sadly, said they were glad I was having a good day. Sarah suggested we enjoy this clarity while it lasted. Michael said we should take videos so they could remember me as I was now. Nobody believed me. The doctor's diagnosis had overridden everything else. That afternoon, while Elizabeth was making lunch and my children were in the other room discussing nursing home options, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went online and started researching. Not dementia, not memory care facilities. I researched Dr. Stephen Morrison. His practice website looked professional. Photos of smiling staff, testimonials from satisfied patients, board certifications and medical school credentials, everything you'd expect from a successful doctor. Nothing seemed suspicious on the surface. But then I started digging deeper. I searched for reviews beyond the ones on his official website. I found a few scattered comments on various forums. Most were positive, but a few caught my attention. Patients complaining that Dr. Morrison had diagnosed them with conditions they didn't think they had, that he'd pushed certain specialists or facilities, that something about his practice felt off. One review mentioned that Dr. Morrison had referred them to Serenity Pines Memory Care, same facility he'd recommended for me. The reviewer said their family member had been diagnosed with dementia and placed in the facility. But then 6 months later, a different doctor had evaluated them and found no dementia, just normal age-related memory changes. The reviewer suspected financial motivations behind the false diagnosis. I kept digging, found more reviews mentioning Serenity Pines, found patterns of Dr. Morrison diagnosing elderly patients with dementia or other conditions requiring nursing home placement, found patients who'd gotten second opinions and discovered their diagnoses were wrong. Then I found something else. Property records showing that Dr. Morrison's brother, James Morrison, owned Serenity Pines Memory Care. Not directly, through a holding company, but if you followed the corporate structure far enough, James Morrison's name appeared as the principal owner. Dr. Morrison was referring patients to a nursing home owned by his brother, patients he'd diagnosed with dementia, patients whose families would be paying thousands of dollars per month for memory care. It was a kickback scheme, a way to funnel patients and money to his brother's business. But it was even worse than that, because if Dr. Morrison was fabricating dementia diagnoses to fill his brother's nursing home, he wasn't just committing fraud, he was destroying people's lives, taking away their freedom, convincing families to lock up their loved ones based on lies. I needed proof. I needed evidence that my diagnosis was false, that my brain scans and test results had been manipulated or misread, that Dr. Morrison was lying about my condition. I called my previous doctor, Dr. Patricia Chen. She'd been my physician for 20 years before she retired. I'd trusted her completely. When she retired 8 months ago, she'd recommended several doctors as replacements. Dr. Morrison hadn't been on that list. I'd found him through an online search. Dr. Chen answered her personal phone. She was enjoying retirement, but still kept up with her former patients. I explained what had happened. The accident, Dr. Morrison's diagnosis, the brain scans showing advanced dementia, the recommendation for immediate nursing home placement. There was a long pause. Then Dr. Chen said something that changed everything. She said she'd seen this before, that several of her former patients had been diagnosed with dementia or other serious conditions shortly after switching to new doctors, that some of those diagnoses had turned out to be false, that she'd been concerned but hadn't had enough evidence to make formal accusations. She said she'd be happy to review my medical records, that she still had connections at Columbus General Hospital, that she could request my brain scans and test results and have them reviewed by a neurologist she trusted, someone independent, someone who had no financial stake in my diagnosis. I thanked her, gave her permission to access my records. She said she'd get back to me as soon as possible, probably within a day or two. In the meantime, she told me not to sign anything, not to agree to nursing home placement, not to give anyone medical power of attorney until we had independent verification of my diagnosis. But that was easier said than done. Because my family believed Dr. Morrison, they trusted his expertise. They thought I was in denial about my condition. They were moving forward with placement plans whether I wanted them to or not. That evening, a lawyer came to our house, Jeffrey Henderson, elder law specialist, same firm that Patricia and David had used when they tried to get conservatorship over their father's lottery winnings. Henderson and Associates seemed to specialize in helping families take control of their elderly relatives. Jeffrey Henderson explained medical power of attorney to my family, how it would allow Elizabeth to make medical decisions on my behalf, how it was necessary given my diagnosis, how it would make everything easier as my condition deteriorated. Elizabeth was ready to sign. Michael and Sarah encouraged her. They all thought this was the responsible thing to do, the practical next step in managing my care. I refused. I said I wasn't signing anything, that I wanted a second opinion before we made any irreversible decisions, that I had the right to another doctor's assessment. Jeffrey Henderson said that was fine, that second opinions were common, but that given my diagnosis, my wishes might not be determinative, that if I was mentally incompetent, my family could petition for guardianship even without my consent. That's when I understood the full scope of what was happening. Dr. Morrison had diagnosed me with advanced dementia. My family believed him. They were pursuing legal mechanisms to take away my autonomy. Once they had medical power of attorney or guardianship, they could make decisions without my input. They could force me into a nursing home against my will, and there would be nothing I could do to stop them. I needed Dr. Chen to get those records reviewed. I needed independent proof that my diagnosis was false. I needed evidence before my family legally took away my ability to make my own decisions. The next morning, Elizabeth insisted we visit Serenity Pines Memory Care. Michael and Sarah were coming too. They wanted to see the facility Dr. Morrison had recommended. They wanted to ask questions and understand what my care would look like. I didn't want to go, but I realized I needed to see this place, needed to understand what Dr. Morrison was pushing my family toward, needed to see the facility his brother owned. Serenity Pines was in a quiet suburb west of Columbus, large modern buildings surrounded by landscaped grounds. It looked nice from the outside, professional, clean, expensive. The director, Margaret Walsh, gave us a tour. She was professional and warm, showed us the common areas, the dining room, the activity spaces. Then she showed us the memory care unit, locked doors, patients wandering in secured hallways, staff supervising constantly. It looked like a prison dressed up as a hospital. Margaret explained their care philosophy, how they kept patients safe, how they managed behavioral issues, how they worked with families during the difficult transition. She made it all sound compassionate and necessary. She also explained the costs, $7,000 per month for standard memory care, more if additional services were needed. Most residents stayed 2 to 5 years. Quick math told me that was $200,000 to $400,000 per patient. If Dr. Morrison was funneling patients here and his brother owned the facility, they were making millions. Elizabeth asked about availability. Margaret said they had openings, could admit me within the week, just needed medical records and financial information. She was ready to start the intake process immediately. My children asked questions about care quality and staff training. They were being diligent, trying to make sure I'd be somewhere safe and appropriate. They thought they were doing the right thing. I watched Margaret's presentation, and I understood the machine I was caught in. Dr. Morrison diagnosed elderly patients with dementia, scared their families with talk of rapid decline and safety concerns, recommended his brother's facility. Families paid thousands of dollars per month. The brothers split the profits, and patients lost their freedom based on fabricated diagnoses. On the drive home, I asked Elizabeth a question. I said if she were in my position, if she felt completely normal but a doctor said she had advanced dementia, would she want a second opinion before being locked in a facility? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said of course she would, that anyone would want a second opinion. but that Dr. Morrison was a respected physician, that the scans and tests were clear, that wanting a second opinion was understandable but probably just denial. I said I'd already arranged a second opinion, that Dr. Chen was reviewing my records, that a neurologist she trusted was looking at my brain scans, that I just needed a few more days before we made any decisions. Elizabeth sighed, said she'd wait, but that if the second opinion confirmed Dr. Morrison's diagnosis, I needed to accept reality, needed to stop fighting what was inevitable, needed to let them take care of me. 2 days later, Dr. Chen called. She said her friend, Dr. Robert Martinez, had reviewed my brain scans. He was a neurologist with 30 years of experience, specialized in dementia and cognitive disorders, taught at Ohio State's medical school. If anyone could read brain scans accurately, it was him. Dr. Martinez had found something interesting. The brain scans Dr. Morrison had shown my family weren't actually my brain scans. The patient ID information matched me, but the actual images were from someone else, someone who did have advanced dementia, someone whose brain showed the deterioration Dr. Morrison had described. Dr. Morrison had swapped the images, taken another patient's diseased brain scans and relabeled them with my information. The scans he'd shown my family were real scans of real dementia, but they weren't scans of my brain. My actual brain scans, the ones taken at Columbus General Hospital on the day of my accident, showed normal age-appropriate changes. No dementia, no deterioration, no pathology requiring nursing home placement, just a 71-year-old brain functioning exactly as it should. Dr. Martinez had also reviewed my cognitive test results. The assessments Dr. Morrison claimed showed severe impairment. Dr. Martinez said the scores didn't match the tests administered, that someone had altered the documentation after I'd taken the tests, that my actual performance had been normal for my age. Everything had been fabricated. The brain scans, the test results, the diagnosis, all of it designed to convince my family I needed immediate nursing home placement. All of it created to funnel me into his brother's facility. Dr. Chen said she was reporting this to the state medical board, that Dr. Martinez was willing to testify, that they had documentation proving the fraud, that Dr. Morrison would face consequences. But that wasn't enough for me, because my family still believed I had dementia, still trusted Dr. Morrison, still thought I was in denial. I needed to prove it to them directly, needed to show them what Dr. Morrison had done. I called Jeffrey Henderson, the lawyer, told him I wanted to schedule that family meeting he'd mentioned, the one where we'd discuss my medical power of attorney. I said I'd reconsidered, that I was ready to cooperate, that I wanted my whole family there. Jeffrey was surprised but pleased, said he could arrange a meeting at his office tomorrow afternoon. Would Elizabeth, Michael, and Sarah be available? I said they would be, that I'd make sure they came. I also made another call to a lawyer I'd found through Dr. Chen, Linda Patterson. She specialized in medical malpractice and elder abuse. I explained what had happened, the false diagnosis, the fabricated scans, the kickback scheme with the nursing home. Linda said she'd love to take the case, that she'd been investigating Serenity Pines and Dr. Morrison for months, that several families had complained, but she hadn't had enough evidence for a strong case, that my situation, with independent medical experts willing to testify, could be the breakthrough she needed. I asked if she could come to Jeffrey Henderson's office tomorrow for the family meeting about medical power of attorney. Linda said absolutely, that it would be a pleasure. The next afternoon, Elizabeth, Michael, and Sarah drove me to Henderson and Associates. They thought we were going to sign papers giving Elizabeth medical authority over me. They thought I'd finally accepted my diagnosis. They thought this was the first step toward my placement at Serenity Pines. Jeffrey Henderson greeted us warmly, showed us to a conference room, said he had papers ready to review and sign, that this would be quick and straightforward. Then Linda Patterson walked in. Jeffrey looked confused. He said this was a private family meeting, that we didn't need another attorney present. Linda introduced herself, said she was my attorney, that I'd retained her to review any legal documents before I signed them, that I had every right to independent legal counsel. Jeffrey looked annoyed, but couldn't argue. Linda was right. I had the right to my own lawyer. Then Dr. Chen walked in, and Dr. Martinez, and a representative from the state medical board. Now Jeffrey looked genuinely concerned. My family looked confused. This wasn't the meeting they'd expected. I stood up. I said I had some things everyone needed to see, some information about Dr. Morrison's diagnosis that would change everything. Dr. Martinez started. He explained who he was, his credentials, his experience with dementia and cognitive disorders. Then he pulled up 2 sets of brain scans on the conference room screen. One set showed severe dementia, significant brain atrophy, clear pathology. These were the scans Dr. Morrison had shown my family. The scans he'd claimed were from my brain. The other set showed normal age-appropriate changes, healthy brain tissue, no dementia, no deterioration. These were my actual brain scans from Columbus General Hospital. Dr. Martinez explained how he knew they were different patients, the anatomical differences, the patient identification information that had been altered, the timestamps that didn't match. He showed point by point that Dr. Morrison had fabricated my diagnosis using another patient's scans. My family sat in stunned silence. Elizabeth looked like she might be sick. Michael was shaking his head in disbelief. Sarah was crying. Then Dr. Chen presented the cognitive test results, showed how my actual scores had been normal, how Dr. Morrison had altered the documentation to make it appear I'd performed poorly, how everything about the diagnosis had been fabricated. The state medical board representative spoke next, explained that they'd opened an investigation into Dr. Morrison, that they'd discovered a pattern of false diagnoses, that at least 15 other patients had been diagnosed with dementia or other conditions requiring nursing home placement, that all 15 had been referred to Serenity Pines, that Dr. Morrison's brother owned the facility. It was an insurance fraud scheme on a massive scale. Dr. Morrison would diagnose elderly patients with serious conditions, convince their families they needed expensive long-term care, refer them to his brother's facility. The facility would bill insurance and Medicare for thousands per month. The brothers would split the profits, and patients would lose their freedom based on lies. Linda Patterson explained that she was filing a lawsuit on behalf of multiple victims, that she expected criminal charges to follow, that both Dr. Morrison and his brother James would face consequences, that Serenity Pines would likely be shut down. She also said that if my family had proceeded with placing me in the facility based on Dr. Morrison's false diagnosis, they could have been held liable, that placing someone in a nursing home against their will based on fabricated medical evidence could constitute false imprisonment, that they should be grateful we'd caught this before any irreversible decisions were made. Jeffrey Henderson, the elder law attorney, looked like he wanted to disappear. His firm had been part of this machine, helping families take legal control of relatives diagnosed by Dr. Morrison, facilitating placements at Serenity Pines. Either he was complicit or he'd been used. Either way, his reputation was about to take a serious hit. Elizabeth was crying now. She kept saying she was sorry, that she'd believed the doctor, that she'd almost let them lock me away, that she should have trusted me when I said I felt fine. Michael and Sarah were both apologizing, saying they'd been trying to help, that they'd thought they were making responsible decisions, that they'd never imagined a doctor would lie about something so serious. I told them I understood, that Dr. Morrison's scheme had been sophisticated, that the brain scans and test results had looked convincing, that they'd been manipulated by someone they trusted, that I didn't blame them for believing a respected physician over a patient who was supposedly in denial. But I also told them this should be a lesson, that they needed to listen to me, that my age didn't mean I was incompetent, that they needed to trust me and respect my autonomy, that the moment they'd stopped believing me and started making decisions for me, they'd become part of the problem. The meeting ended with Jeffrey Henderson saying his firm wouldn't be representing my family after all, that given the circumstances, he thought it best they find different counsel. Linda Patterson said she'd be happy to help if they needed estate planning or other legal services in the future. The state medical board representative said Dr. Morrison's medical license had been suspended pending investigation, that he'd been ordered to turn over all patient records, that criminal charges were likely, that this case would probably lead to reforms in how dementia diagnoses were verified before nursing home placement. We drove home in silence. My family was processing what had happened, how close they'd come to putting me in a facility based on lies, how easily they'd been manipulated, how their trust in authority had almost cost me my freedom. That evening, we sat together in our living room, the first real conversation we'd had since my accident. Elizabeth held my hand and apologized again, said she should have gotten a second opinion immediately, should have questioned why Dr. Morrison was pushing so hard for quick placement, should have trusted her instincts that something felt wrong. Michael said he'd been researching memory care facilities for days, looking at reviews and costs and care quality. He'd been so focused on finding the best place to send me that he hadn't stopped to question whether I needed to be sent anywhere at all. Sarah said she'd been devastated by my diagnosis, had been grieving the loss of her father even though I was sitting right there, had started thinking of me as someone who was already gone. She said it was easier to believe the doctor's diagnosis than to face the uncertainty of not knowing what was wrong. I understood all of it. They'd been trying to help in the only way they knew how. They'd trusted medical authority. They'd made practical plans. They'd tried to be responsible children managing a parent's decline, but they'd also stopped seeing me as a person, had stopped listening to what I was saying, had treated me like a problem to be managed rather than a human being with rights and autonomy. I told them that getting older didn't mean giving up agency, that needing help sometimes didn't mean being helpless, that they needed to keep communicating with me and believing me and including me in decisions about my own life. They promised they would. Elizabeth said she was throwing away my medical power of attorney documents, that she never wanted legal authority to overrule my wishes, that we'd face whatever came in the future together, as partners, not as guardian and ward. The next few months were intense. Linda Patterson's lawsuit moved forward. More victims came forward. People who'd been diagnosed by Dr. Morrison and placed in Serenity. Pines. People who'd spent months or years in locked memory care units based on false diagnoses. People whose families had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for unnecessary care. Dr. Martinez testified about the fraudulent brain scans, showed how Dr. Morrison had systematically switched images, how he'd used stock photos of diseased brains and relabeled them with patient information, how he'd created entirely fictional diagnoses to justify nursing home placement. The state medical board revoked Dr. Morrison's license permanently, found him guilty of fraud, falsifying medical records, and endangering patients. He faced criminal charges as well: insurance fraud, elder abuse, practicing medicine with intent to defraud. His brother James was charged with conspiracy and fraud. Serenity Pines was shut down. Patients were evaluated by independent physicians. Several were found to have been incorrectly diagnosed. They were released to their families and their freedom. Jeffrey Henderson's law firm faced scrutiny too. Turned out they'd been receiving referral fees from Serenity Pines for every family they helped establish guardianship or power of attorney. They'd been part of the financial pipeline feeding patients into the facility. The firm dissolved. Several attorneys faced disciplinary proceedings. The whole scheme had been running for at least 5 years. Dozens of patients, millions of dollars in fraudulent billing, countless families destroyed by lies, all so 2 brothers could profit from other people's fear and trust. I testified at Dr. Morrison's trial, described my experience, the rushed diagnosis, the fabricated scans, the pressure to accept immediate nursing home placement, the way my family had been manipulated into making decisions against my wishes. The jury convicted him on all counts. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison. His brother got 12 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution to victims and their families. Linda Patterson's civil lawsuit resulted in a $10 million settlement, split among 43 victims and their families. It wasn't about the money for most of us. It was about justice, about holding people accountable, about making sure this couldn't happen to others. Several families used their settlement money to establish a foundation, the Cognitive Rights Project, dedicated to protecting elderly people from false diagnoses and inappropriate institutionalization. They lobbied for laws requiring second opinions before dementia diagnosis could justify nursing home placement. They provided funding for independent medical evaluations when families suspected false diagnoses. I donated my settlement to the foundation. Elizabeth and I didn't need the money. We needed to know that what happened to us would help prevent it from happening to others. The car accident that started all this turned out to be fortuitous in a terrible way. If I hadn't been in that accident, I wouldn't have ended up at the hospital, where Dr. Morrison could target me. But also, if I hadn't been in that accident, I might never have discovered what he was doing, might never have been in a position to expose his scheme. Sometimes I think about the patients who weren't as lucky as me, the ones who didn't have a Dr. Chen to advocate for them, the ones whose families completed the placement process before anyone questioned the diagnosis, the ones who spent their final years locked in memory care facilities, knowing they were cognitively intact but unable to convince anyone. That could have been me, if Dr. Chen hadn't helped, If Dr. Martinez hadn't reviewed my scans, if I hadn't pushed for a second opinion, I'd be at Serenity Pines right now. Elizabeth would be visiting on weekends. My children would be telling themselves they'd made the right decision, and I'd be trapped in a facility based on lies. My relationship with my family changed after all this. We're closer now, more honest with each other. Elizabeth listens more carefully when I express concerns. Michael and Sarah take my opinions seriously. We make decisions together instead of them making decisions for me. But there's also something that was broken and can't be fully repaired, because for those few days, they were ready to lock me away. They believed a doctor they barely knew over the father they'd known their entire lives. They were willing to take away my freedom based on someone else's say-so. I understand why. I don't blame them, but I can't forget it either. Can't forget the feeling of being powerless, of having people I loved making plans to institutionalize me against my will, of knowing that if I didn't fight back, I'd lose everything. Elizabeth knows this. We've talked about it. She says it's her deepest regret, that she'll spend the rest of her life trying to make up for those days when she doubted me, when she saw me as a patient instead of a partner, when she was ready to let doctors and lawyers make decisions about my life without truly listening to what I was saying. I tell her I've forgiven her, and I have. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't erase the knowledge that when I needed her to believe in me most, she believed in Dr. Morrison instead. The accident happened almost 2 years ago now. I'm 73 years old, healthy, cognitively intact, still living in my own home with Elizabeth, still driving, still making my own decisions about my life and my medical care. Sometimes I see elderly people in public, and I wonder about their situations. Are they getting good medical care? Do their families listen to them? Are they being treated with dignity and respect? Or are they being railroaded into institutions by families who've stopped seeing them as people? I've become an advocate. I speak at community centers and senior organizations. I tell my story. I warn people about medical fraud targeting the elderly. I encourage families to get second opinions, to listen to their loved ones, to question authority when something doesn't feel right. I tell them that getting older means gaining wisdom and experience. It doesn't mean becoming incompetent. It doesn't mean giving up autonomy. It doesn't mean accepting whatever medical professionals tell you without question. I tell them that dementia is real and serious, that when it happens, families need to provide care and support, but that diagnosis should be made carefully by multiple professionals, that it should never be rushed, that patients have the right to independent evaluations and second opinions. I tell them about the warning signs of medical fraud. Doctors who push for immediate placement without time for families to process, facilities that seem too eager to accept patients, financial arrangements that seem designed to benefit providers more than patients, the importance of independent verification of serious diagnoses. People thank me after these talks, say I've given them information that could protect their parents or themselves, say they'll be more careful now, more questioning, more insistent on proper verification before accepting life-changing diagnoses. Some people share their own stories, relatives who were diagnosed with dementia and placed in facilities only to be reevaluated years later and found to have been misdiagnosed. By then, the damage was done, years lost, relationships destroyed, money wasted, all because no one questioned the initial diagnosis. One woman told me about her mother, diagnosed with dementia at 68, placed in memory care, spent 3 years there before a new doctor evaluated her and found she'd actually had a treatable vitamin deficiency, causing cognitive symptoms. Once treated, her mind cleared completely. But those 3 years were gone. The trauma of being institutionalized against her will remained. Another man told me about his father, diagnosed with dementia after a minor stroke. Family was told he needed specialized care. He was placed in a facility against his protests, died there 6 months later. The family later discovered the diagnosis had been questionable, that their father had been cognitively intact but physically weak, that he died of what they believed was a broken heart, gave up because no one would listen when he said he was fine. These stories haunt me because they could have been my story. I was days away from being placed at Serenity Pines, days away from losing my freedom based on fabricated evidence. If Dr. Chen hadn't helped, if the timing had been slightly different, I'd have ended up like these other victims. The Cognitive Rights Project has helped change some laws, Ohio now requires 2 independent physicians to confirm a dementia diagnosis before it can be used as grounds for involuntary placement. Neither physician can have a financial relationship with the proposed facility. Patients have the right to choose their own evaluating physician. It's not perfect. Determined fraudsters can still game the system, but it's better than it was. Harder to push someone into a facility based on one doctor's questionable diagnosis. More safeguards to protect patient autonomy. Other states are adopting similar laws. The case against Dr. Morrison became national news. Doctor and brother ran nursing home fraud scheme. The story prompted investigations in other states. Other doctors with financial ties to nursing homes. Other suspicious patterns of diagnosis and placement. Several more fraud rings were uncovered. Not as large as Morrison's operation, but similar in structure. Doctors referring to facilities they had financial interests in, questionable diagnoses leading to profitable placements, patients losing freedom while providers made money. The medical community has been forced to examine these issues. Medical schools now teach about the risks of financial conflicts of interest, about the importance of independent verification for serious diagnoses, about protecting patient autonomy, even when patients seem impaired. Some good has come from what happened to me. Systems have improved. Protections have been strengthened. Awareness has increased. But I know there are still victims, still families being manipulated, still patients being institutionalized based on questionable diagnoses. I got a letter last month from a man in Michigan. He'd read about my case online. He said his mother had been diagnosed with dementia and placed in a memory care facility. But something felt wrong. His mother insisted she was fine. The diagnosis had come from a doctor who seemed too eager to recommend a specific facility. The family had felt pressured to make quick decisions. He asked for advice. I told him to get an independent evaluation immediately, gave him Dr. Martinez's contact information, suggested he document everything, and consider legal counsel if the independent evaluation contradicted the original diagnosis. He wrote back 3 weeks later. The independent evaluation found his mother had no dementia. She had depression following his father's death, treatable with therapy and medication. The original doctor had diagnosed dementia based on minimal testing and pushed for immediate placement. The family had gotten her out of the facility. She was home now, receiving proper treatment. He thanked me, said my story had saved his mother from years of wrongful institutionalization, that he'd been about to give up, accept the diagnosis, let the professionals handle everything. That hearing what happened to me had made him question authority and fight for his mother's rights. I get letters like that regularly now. People who saw my story, who recognized similar patterns in their own situations, who got second opinions and discovered false diagnoses, who protected their loved ones because they knew what to look for. Each letter reminds me why I keep speaking out, why I keep telling my story even though it's painful, because every person who avoids what happened to me makes it worthwhile. Every family that questions a suspicious diagnosis is a potential fraud prevented. Elizabeth and I are careful now about medical care. We've established relationships with multiple doctors. We get second opinions on anything serious. We ask questions and verify information. We don't accept authority without evidence. Our children have learned from this too. Michael questions doctors now, asks about financial interests and conflicts, researches diagnoses independently. Make sure he understands before accepting recommendations. Sarah has become an advocate in her own way. She works in healthcare administration. She's implementing policies at her hospital to prevent the kind of fraud Dr. Morrison committed, requiring multiple physician verification for serious diagnoses, prohibiting financial relationships between physicians and facilities they refer to, training staff to recognize warning signs of medical fraud. The whole experience changed our family's relationship with healthcare. We're more skeptical, more questioning, more insistent on our rights as patients. Some doctors don't like it. They want compliant patients who accept their recommendations without challenge, but most respect patients who are informed and engaged. I still drive past Columbus General Hospital sometimes, the place where this all started, where Dr. Morrison showed up uninvited and began his scheme to have me institutionalized, where he showed my family fabricated brain scans and convinced them I needed immediate placement in his brother's facility. I think about how close I came, how a few different decisions could have resulted in me spending my final years locked in Serenity Pines, how my story could have ended very differently if I hadn't been persistent. if I hadn't had advocates like Dr. Chen, if I hadn't demanded evidence and verification. I also think about Dr. Morrison sometimes. He's in prison now, lost everything. His medical license, his freedom, his reputation, his life's work revealed as an elaborate fraud built on exploiting vulnerable patients and their families. Part of me feels satisfaction at his conviction. Justice served. A predator removed from society. Patients protected from future harm. But part of me wonders what led him to this. Was he always corrupt? Or did he start with good intentions and gradually rationalize worse and worse behavior? Did he tell himself he was helping by providing profitable care? Did he believe his own lies? I'll never know. And it doesn't really matter. Whatever his motivations, his actions destroyed lives, took away freedom from people who'd done nothing wrong, exploited families in their most vulnerable moments. He deserves everything he got. His brother James had fewer qualms, apparently. The evidence showed James knew exactly what they were doing, that he'd recruited his brother into the scheme, that Serenity Pines was specifically designed to accept patients with questionable diagnoses because those patients couldn't effectively advocate for themselves. James had been in the nursing home business for years, had owned several facilities, had seen how profitable memory care could be, had realized that if he could guarantee a steady stream of patients, he could maximize profits. His brother's medical practice provided that stream. All Stephen had to do was diagnose elderly patients with dementia and refer them to Serenity Pines. Easy money for both of them. The trial revealed they'd made over $8 million from the scheme over 5 years. $8 million stolen from patients and insurance companies and Medicare. $8 million earned by destroying people's lives and freedom. The restitution payments will never fully compensate victims. Money can't give back lost years, can't restore relationships damaged by wrongful institutionalization, can't erase the trauma of being locked up against your will while insisting you were fine and having no one believe you. But the convictions matter. The prison sentences matter. The permanent revocation of medical licenses matters. Not because they undo the harm, but because they send a message that this behavior has consequences, that exploiting vulnerable patients will result in serious punishment. I hope other doctors considering similar schemes hear that message. I hope families being pressured into quick medical decisions remember my story. I hope patients facing questionable diagnoses know they have the right to question and verify and demand independent evaluation. Last month was the 2-year anniversary of my accident. Elizabeth and I went out to dinner to commemorate it, not to celebrate the accident itself, but to acknowledge what we'd survived, what we'd learned, how we'd changed. Over dinner, Elizabeth said something interesting. She said in some ways, what happened was a gift, not the accident, not the fraud, but the clarity it provided. The way it forced us to confront how we thought about aging and autonomy and trust. She said that before this happened, she'd been unconsciously treating me as less capable, making small decisions without consulting me, taking charge of things she assumed I couldn't handle anymore. Not because I'd shown any decline, just because I was getting older, and she'd absorbed societal messages that elderly people need to be managed. The false diagnosis had accelerated that tendency, had given her permission to take full control, to stop seeing me as a partner and start seeing me as someone who needed to be cared for like a child. But fighting back against the diagnosis had forced her to confront those assumptions, had made her realize I was still fully capable, still deserving of autonomy and respect, still someone whose opinions and wishes mattered. She said it had been a wake-up call, a reminder that our marriage was a partnership of equals, that getting older didn't change that fundamental relationship, that she needed to keep treating me as an equal partner, even as we both aged and potentially needed more help. I appreciated her honesty. It's not easy to admit you were wrong about something so fundamental, not easy to acknowledge you were ready to institutionalize your spouse based on questionable evidence, not easy to face the fact that you'd stopped listening to someone you loved, but her willingness to confront those truths has made our relationship stronger. We communicate better now. We check in with each other about decisions. We make sure we're both being heard and respected. We're more aware of the subtle ways ageism can creep into how we treat each other. Michael and Sarah have changed too. They call more often now, not just when they need something. Actual conversations where they ask about my life and listen to my opinions. They include me in family decisions. They treat me like someone whose input matters. I think my near institutionalization scared them, made them realize they could lose me not just to death, but to wrongful diagnosis and placement, made them understand that their father was still here, still vital, still someone they wanted in their lives. The grandchildren know the story, too. Not all the details, but enough to understand that Grandpa fought back when a bad doctor tried to lock him up, that he stood up for himself when everyone else believed the lies, that he proved he was still sharp and capable. My oldest grandson, who's 16 now, told me he thinks the story is cool, that Grandpa is like a hero who exposed a villain and saved other people from the same fate. It's a simplified version of what happened, but I appreciate his perspective. Nice to be seen as strong and capable rather than old and declining. I've started writing all this down, my full account of what happened, the details of Dr. Morrison's fraud scheme, the warning signs families should look for, the lessons I learned about medical advocacy and patient rights. My daughter Sarah thinks it could be a book, something that could help educate people and prevent similar frauds. I don't know if it'll actually become a book. Writing is harder than I expected. Reliving the experience in detail is emotionally exhausting. But I keep at it because I think the story needs to be told, needs to be available for families facing similar situations, needs to serve as a warning and a guide. Linda Patterson, my attorney, thinks the book is a good idea. She says the legal case is closed, but the public education component is just beginning, that my first-hand account of being targeted by medical fraud could be valuable for researchers, policymakers, and families, that personal stories are more powerful than statistics in changing behavior and awareness. So I write, an hour or two each day, sometimes more when the memories flow easily, sometimes less when it's too painful to revisit. Elizabeth reads what I write and adds her perspective, how it felt from her side, what she was thinking when she believed the diagnosis, why she was ready to accept Dr. Morrison's recommendations without question. Her sections are hard to read, seeing how quickly she'd been convinced I was declining, how easily Dr. Morrison's lies had overridden years of knowing me intimately, how fear had made her vulnerable to manipulation. But her honesty makes the story stronger, shows how even smart, loving families can be deceived by sophisticated medical fraud. The Cognitive Rights Project wants to publish the book when it's done, use it as an educational tool, distribute it to senior centers and hospitals and medical schools, make it part of their training programs for healthcare advocates. I've agreed. This was never about making money. It's about preventing others from experiencing what I experienced. I'm 73 years old now. I've lived through a lot, world events, personal tragedies, joys and sorrows, but nothing prepared me for being told I had advanced dementia when I knew I was fine. Nothing prepared me for fighting to prove my own sanity to people who'd already decided I was incompetent. It was the most frightening experience of my life, not because of what Dr. Morrison tried to do, but because of how close he came to succeeding, how easily my family had been convinced, how quickly I'd nearly lost everything based on fabricated evidence. But I fought back. I questioned. I demanded verification. I refused to accept a diagnosis that didn't match my lived experience, and that made all the difference. I tell people now that the most important thing is to trust yourself. If a diagnosis doesn't feel right, question it. If doctors are pushing too hard for quick decisions, slow down. If something seems off about a recommended facility or treatment, investigate. Your instincts matter. Your experience of your own mind and body matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And for families, I say this: listen to your loved ones. Really listen. Don't assume that age means incompetence. Don't let fear override your knowledge of who someone is. Get second opinions. Ask hard questions. Verify everything. Your loved one's autonomy and dignity depend on it. I was lucky. I had Dr. Chen advocating for me. I had the presence of mind to demand verification. I had just enough time to gather evidence before irreversible decisions were made. But not everyone is that lucky. Not everyone has the resources or support or timing that I had. That's why this story matters. That's why I keep telling it. That's why I'll keep fighting for patient rights and medical transparency and protections against fraud. Because somewhere right now, there's another Dr. Morrison diagnosing patients with conditions they don't have. Another family being pressured to institutionalize someone based on lies. Another victim losing their freedom while insisting they're fine and having no one believe them. If my story helps even one person avoid that fate, it's worth the pain of reliving it, worth the discomfort of sharing such personal details, worth the ongoing work of advocacy and education. 2 years ago, I woke up in a hospital and was told I had advanced dementia. My family believed it. My children planned to institutionalize me. My autonomy was about to be stripped away based on a doctor's lies. But I fought back, proved the diagnosis was false, exposed the fraud, sent the perpetrators to prison, protected not just myself but dozens of other potential victims. Some people call me brave. I don't feel brave. I feel lucky. Lucky to have survived. Lucky to have had help. Lucky to have been able to fight effectively. But if telling my story helps others be brave in their own situations, helps them question authority and demand verification and protect their loved ones, then maybe there's some truth to it. Maybe standing up for yourself when everyone else has stopped believing you is a kind of bravery. Maybe refusing to accept a false narrative about your own mind is courageous. I don't know. I just know I couldn't accept being locked away for something I didn't have. Couldn't let Dr. Morrison destroy my life to profit his brother's nursing home. Couldn't stop fighting even when my own family thought I was in denial. And now, 2 years later, I'm still here, still in my own home, still making my own decisions, still cognitively intact despite Dr. Morrison's false diagnosis, still married to Elizabeth, still part of my children's lives, still free. That's what matters. That's what I fought for. And that's what I want for every other person facing questionable medical diagnoses and pressure to give up their autonomy. Trust yourself, question authority, demand verification, fight for your rights, and never let anyone convince you that getting older means giving up control of your own life. Did you like my story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next story with love and respect.